Hey guys, it's Michael Kummer here, and in today's video I'd like to do an experiment. In fact, I want to do a couple of experiments. I want to find out if eating too much protein can kick me out of ketosis. But before we get started, make sure you subscribe to this channel and you click on the little alert button so you get notified when I publish more videos like this. Now, if you're familiar with the ketogenic diet, you probably know that you're supposed to eat a lot of fat, very few carbs, and moderate amounts of protein. And many people believe that eating too much protein can kick you out of ketosis. Now, let's see if that is a correct assumption. Well, first of all, it is certainly true that your body has a lot of cells that require glucose for fuel. So you need to be able to get glucose from somewhere. And if it doesn't come from the food you eat, then your body needs to be able to make glucose from non-carbohydrate sources. And it can do that in a process, or via a process called gluconeogenesis. That's the creation of new glucose from non-carb sources. So theoretically, if you don't eat anything, the body could make glucose from taking muscle tissue and converting it back into amino acids and then converting that into glucose. So that is a real thing. Gluconeogenesis is a real thing. However, based on everything that I've heard and read, and based on the latest scientific evidence, gluconeogenesis is a very stable and demand-driven process. So in other words, the body only makes as much glucose as it needs to satisfy its requirements. It's not a supply-driven process. So that means regardless of how much protein you eat, the rate of which your body converts that protein, for example, into glucose remains stable. It doesn't matter how much protein you eat. So that led me to believe, for the most part, that eating too much protein will have no impact on my blood sugar and my ketone levels. However, nothing is as simple in the human body. The metabolism is a very complex process, and there might be other factors involved that could potentially kick you out of ketosis if you eat too much protein. And that's what I want to find out by doing a couple of experiments. So what I want to do over the next couple of days is I want to have a very high protein meal every day, preceded by a 16-hour fast. So basically I would stop eating at dinner or after dinner and not eat until next day lunch, intermittent fasting basically, and then have a high protein lunch. Maybe one day I do chicken, the other day I do red meat, I might do fish, and I'm also gonna do protein powder to see if any of these meals or foods have a major impact on my blood sugar and my ketone levels. And to measure both, I have two devices at my disposal. One is a continuous glucose monitor. This one is from Abbott. It's the FreeStyle Libre, and I'm gonna use it in combination with the Levels Health app. And that app allows me to correlate my food intake and my meals and physical activity with changes in blood glucose levels, since this guy is continuously monitoring and the app is then correlating. So based on my input, if I say, okay, I had 4 pounds of chicken for lunch, it can tell me then what impact that lunch had on my glucose levels. So that's number one. The second thing, the ketone monitor I'm gonna use is this one. It's called BioSense. And it's a breath ketone analyzer, but it's unlike your ordinary breath ketone analyzer that you might find on Amazon. This one is a medical device that has been clinically proven to be accurate, and accuracy obviously is important. And I'm going to be using this instead of my Keto Mojo blood ketone tester, and for two reasons. One, this is more accurate, and the second one is I'm going to be testing a lot, and I don't want to stick my finger every couple of hours. That gets old really, really quick. And so with this guy, I could theoretically measure my breath ketone levels every 5 minutes, and very non-invasive and very accurate. So with these two, I'm going to be checking right before each meal, then 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, etc. after the meal, to see if any of those foods have an impact on my blood sugar as well as on my ketone levels. And so before we get into the first test, let me tell you, I'm going to be revealing all of the results at the very end and draw my conclusions basically and give you my take on the findings. So stick with it. And with that said, let's get into the first test. All right, so for today's test, we're going to have chicken. So a lot of chicken, pan fried with ghee or clarified butter. And before we get started, let's do a baseline. Let's see what my ketones level are right now using this breath ketone meter, and then we're gonna check my glucose levels, and after the meal, an hour later, 2 hours later, I'll check again. All right, while this is analyzing, let's check my glucose. So we're at 83 milligram per deciliter glucose, and we are at 15 ACEs ketone. So I'm at advanced ketosis, it looks like. And then I'll eat this and we'll see how all of that changes an hour and 2 hours after the meal. Hey guys, so today we're gonna do our second test with seafood. So what I'm gonna have here is a seafood ceviche that we made last night, and some trout that I smoked yesterday, and then some smoked salmon from Costco. And I've been fasting now for almost 24 hours, 23 and a half hours. I'm hungry, I worked out this morning, so I expended some energy. I already had a slight increase in glucose during the workout, but it recovered nicely. I already took my readings. I had 79 milligram per deciliter blood glucose, so nice and low. And my breath ketone readings came in at 16 ACEs, so I'm well into ketosis. And now we're gonna have protein, fish protein, and we'll see what that's gonna do to the glucose and to my ketones. Stay tuned. Hey guys, so for today's tests, we're gonna use protein powder. And thanks to Equip for sending me a bag of their prime protein. It's a beef protein isolate. Tastes very good, very clean, and my suspicion is that because it's pretty much pure protein, I mean, it has, I think, 1 gram of net carbs and a little bit of fat, half a gram of fat, that it's gonna be absorbed much quicker than, you know, chicken, fish, or red meat, simply because we don't have any of the connective tissue and none of that stuff that you would typically find in meat that might slow down the metabolism and your insulin response. So I suspect that to be metabolized a little bit quicker, maybe trigger a different insulin response, but we'll see. Instead of using 1 serving, I actually put in 2 scoops, so that's I think 42 grams of protein mixed with water, and I'm gonna have that now. I've been fasting for 16-ish or so hours. I had dinner at 5:30 last night. Now it's 20 to 11, and I already tested my glucose and my ketones. My glucose is at 90 right now, milligram per deciliter, and it's still on a downward slope from the spike triggered by my morning workout. So I'm still on the recovery phase. My glucose hasn't really settled yet, but I don't think it matters very much. My ketone levels are at 8 ACEs, so I'm in moderate ketosis, and I'm not where I was a couple of days ago, 15 to 18. So I suspect that if I have an impact, and by just a couple of ACEs in terms of breath ketones, it might actually either kick me out of ketosis or we get close to it. So let's find out, but before we're gonna have this bad boy, it's super thick and creamy and delicious, I love it. And then we're gonna measure in an hour, 2 and 3 and see what's gonna happen. Cheers. All right, see you later. Hey guys, so today's our last test, and I'm gonna eat red meat exclusively and see what that's gonna do. I already measured my breath ketones and my blood glucose. My breath ketones came in at 5 ACEs, which is relatively low, moderate ketosis, and my blood sugar is at 89 milligrams per deciliter. So with being only in moderate or very light ketosis, I suspect that if there is any change in ketone levels, then it might actually kick me out of ketosis, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes. I'm gonna eat a couple of those bad boys, grass-fed beef patties, and then again, we'll check in 1, 2, and 3 hours and see what my levels do, and next we'll look at the results and see what happened. All right, the tests are done, and let's get to the results. So they're pretty interesting, but not necessarily surprising for me. So let's look at what we've got. So I printed everything out because there are quite a lot of numbers, and I'll ask my editor to put everything here on the screen, either on the bottom or on the side, so you'll see everything. But basically, I had first chicken, then fish, then beef protein isolate, and then red meat, beef patties basically. Let's start with chicken. So with a chicken meal, I overate on purpose. I really had a lot of chicken to see if maybe extraordinary amounts of protein would make a difference. And so I started out with a glucose reading of 83 milligram per deciliter before the meal. 1 hour after, I had 97, so it went up a little bit, and 2 hours later I had 100. And after that I kept testing, it kind of tapered off again. So my glucose basically went up by 17 points, which is not bad because, you know, even 100 would be considered a normal fasting glucose reading. So I was still within my fasting range, quote unquote. My ketones, I started with 15 ACEs, and I'll explain the ACEs then in a little bit, so hang tight. So I started with 15, an hour later I was at 12, and 2 hours later I was at 10. So my ketones went down a little bit by about 5 points, but still nowhere near getting kicked out of ketosis. The fish, I started with 79 blood glucose. 1 hour later I was at 84, and 2 hours later I was at 104. So it went up a little bit more because it started out at a lower number than the chicken, but still nothing crazy, nothing like, you know, if I had eaten a cookie or something. The ketones were interesting. I started out with a reading of 16 ACEs. 1 hour later I was at 17, and 2 hours later I was still at 17. So my ketones actually went up with fish, or after having consumed quite a bit of fish. Then we had the beef protein isolate, so a very fast absorbing and quickly metabolized protein powder that I assumed would have maybe a different, more significant impact on my blood sugar and ketone levels. And I started out with 90 milligram per deciliter blood glucose. An hour later I was at 96, and 2 hours later I was at 89. So it actually went up a little bit and then quickly recovered, and I ended up with actually a lower reading than before the meal. In terms of ketones, I started out with 8, and an hour later I was at 8, and 2 hours later I was at 12. So my ketone reading actually, or my ketones, went up 2 hours after having consumed that protein powder, which was interesting and surprising a little bit, to be quite honest. And then the last test was red meat. I started out with glucose readings of 89. An hour later I was at 91, and 2 hours later I was at 104, and then after that it tapered down again. In terms of ketones, I started out with 5. That was my lowest reading in the last couple of days actually. An hour later I was at 5, 2 hours later I was still at 5. So I did nothing to my ketone readings. Now, with that said, let me try to interpret what we are seeing here. So I think one of the most important things here is that I confirmed that the amount of protein that you eat doesn't necessarily change the rate of gluconeogenesis, of the creation of new glucose from non-carb sources. If that was the case, if just the amount of protein that I consume would change the rate of which my body makes glucose from that protein, I would have seen significantly higher spikes, and I didn't. And I kind of knew that going into this experiment because gluconeogenesis is a very stable and a demand-driven process. That means the body makes just as much glucose as it needs to fulfill its energy need, and that's it, regardless of how much you eat. And in terms of ketosis, obviously, if your glucose doesn't go up, then gluconeogenesis is also not going to impact your ketosis. However, to kind of loop back to the question, can eating too much protein kick you out of ketosis? We've seen in some of the examples, my ketones actually went down during the first test, really, where I ate so much chicken that I got a stomachache for the rest of the day. And the reason wasn't obviously the glucose, because that remained relatively stable. But what I think happened is that if you eat too much of anything, could be protein, could be fat, then your body needs to do something with the excess energy. And what can your body do if it cannot use it right away, if it cannot get rid of it through increasing your temperature? There's only so much your body can do to burn energy as heat, basically. If there is nothing to exhale or to urinate, then what does the body do? Well, it stores the excess energy for times when there is no food. That's exactly what the body does. And what is the fat storage hormone in the body? Well, it's insulin. And so I believe that regardless of what you eat, if you eat way too much, you get an insulin response. Unfortunately, that's the one thing that I couldn't test. So your body releases insulin to store the excess energy as fat, and whenever insulin is high, ketones are typically lower. That's why I think in my first test, where I ate significantly more than I needed and should have eaten, I had probably a higher insulin response, or a more significant insulin response, and so my ketone levels actually went down. In all the other cases where I ate more than what I usually would, but not in excessive amounts, my ketone levels remained relatively stable. So I guess my body managed somehow to, deal with that excess energy in the short term by either increasing my body temperature or making me exhale some of that through, ketones that you can measure in your breath. But there are a couple of other things that a high protein diet could potentially do to your body that are not always beneficial, completely unrelated to ketosis. And one of them is the body's cell recycle program, autophagy is what it's called, gets impacted or disabled when there are certain amino acids in your body. So when you constantly eat protein, then you might not get into that autophagy very often, and so it impacts you in the long run because some of those cell recycle programs don't get activated, and you might age quicker than you should. That's why I recommend sometimes to practice intermittent fasting, caloric restriction, or on days where you don't work out, don't eat protein maybe, or significantly reduce your protein intake to give your body a chance to start those cell recycle programs. And then the other thing is that I've noticed personally, if you eat too much protein, you might have to urinate more often than necessary. And while during the day that might not be an issue, I have noticed that if I eat a lot of protein during the day, and especially for dinner, I have to get up and pee at night. And obviously that disrupts your sleep. And so if that's something that you're suffering with, and you don't suffer of any kidney or other disease that might cause this, high protein intake might be the culprit. And try to remove your protein, especially in the second half of the day, and you'll probably see an improvement there. One more thing that I wanted to mention and elaborate on, and that is this device, that breath ketone analyzer, that uses ACEs as the unit of measurement. And so if you're only used to blood ketone testers, you might wonder, how do they compare? And so basically there are 3 different types of ketone bodies that you could potentially measure. One is BHB in the blood, and then there are the ACEs here that you can measure via your breath. And just so you know, there is an approximate correlation between those 2 values. So a ACE level of 5 would roughly correlate to a 0.5 mmol per liter in the blood. So if I had before a level of 17, that would be 1.7 in the blood. So my lowest level that I've recorded during those tests was a 5 ACEs, and that would roughly correspond to 0.5 mmol per liter, which means I was just in nutritional ketosis at that point. But that's pretty much it. So bottom line, don't be afraid of protein, even though the ketogenic diet suggests eating moderate amounts of protein. I always eat a lot of protein. I also eat a lot of fat and very few carbs, but none of that eating habit has ever kicked me out of ketosis. And I think I've not proven it because there are obviously many factors involved in both ketosis as well as your blood glucose levels. So this is obviously not the ultimate proof, but based on all the scientific literature and based on what I've seen, I'm not afraid of eating as much protein as I need and as I want. And I have yet to be kicked out of ketosis because of that. But now let me know, how do you feel about protein? How much protein do you eat, and how has it impacted your ketone levels? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe and click on the little alert button so you get notified when I publish more videos like this. Until next time.